All right, we'll get started. Want to welcome folks to the Iowa Learning Farms webinar and this week's conservation webinar. I'm Matt Helmers with Iowa State University in the Department of Ag and Biosystems Engineering, and fortunate to be back this week to help moderate this webinar. And as we start, introduce our speaker, Alicia Vasto, that is the Water Program Director at the Iowa Environmental Council. And Alicia was awarded and was one of the new voices in Iowa in water quality winner in I think that was 2022 that we did that was done at Ryman Gardens here in Iowa. And as has been done with other winners throughout the last year, we invite them, if they so choose, to speak on a webinar. And this is Alicia graciously agreed to speak. And so we do want to acknowledge that this is a challenging and often controversial topic on CAFOs, but we encourage folks to have an open mind and have open dialogue. I think this is an opportunity for dialogue. We don't necessarily endorse the view of any webinar speaker as in the past, but we want to create that opportunity to engage in different perspectives and hear from folks to better understand some of the issues that issues facing agriculture in Iowa. And I think this one is a really important one, thinking about the impacts, costs, and rulemaking of CAFOs in Iowa. So Alicia, I look forward to hearing this, and I'm sure we'll have some great dialogue when you get done. So with that, the virtual floor is all yours.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to speak on this topic. Just to reiterate, my name is Alicia Vasto. I'm the Water Program Director at the Iowa Environmental Council. I've been with the council for about 4.5 years now. I grew up just west of Des Moines in Adel, and my background is in environmental science and environmental management. Today, I'm going to talk with you a little bit about IEC for those of you who may not know us, and then I'm going to talk about our work on CAFOs and some of the work we've done related to rulemaking and the DNR's proposed changes for rules related to CAFO regulation. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the economics of water quality and what you can do, and then we'll have Q&A. So for those of you who don't know us, the Iowa Environmental Council is a nonprofit organization. We're nonpartisan, but we work on law and policy issues related to water, land, climate, and energy here in Iowa. We are a coalition organization, so we have over 100 member organizations that are other nonprofits, as well as businesses that share our desire to protect Iowa's environment and create a sustainable future. So just a little bit of background on CAFOs and water quality in Iowa. When I say CAFOs, I mean concentrated animal feeding operations. And in Iowa, we have a lot of them. So over the past 30 years, they've really grown across our state. And this map is showing just the large CAFOs, which are animal units, CAFOs with animal units more than 1,000. So there are many more other smaller CAFOs in our state, and they've just really proliferated across our landscape. Most of those operations are confinements, but there are some that are feedlots. So that would mean that they're partially unroofed. And then if we are looking at it by animal type, we have mostly hogs here in the state. And this is animal units. So a hog is less than one animal unit. So we have a lot more hogs, and then many chickens as well. So we have a lot of livestock in the state. And for our CAFO operations, we are the state with the most amount of CAFOs. So in Iowa, we have many CAFOs, many large CAFOs, and most of those are unpermitted. So under the Clean Water Act, if you are a discharging facility, you need a permit but most of the CAFOs in the state are considered non-discharging, so they are not permitted by the EPA under the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. And most of the facilities are just under the size that is needed to really take a hard look at whether or not the facility is discharging. So when it reaches 1,000 animal units is when the EPA takes an interest. So there are a lot of facilities that come in just under that threshold, so they don't have to really look at whether or not they need a permit. In Iowa, all of this livestock has an impact on water quality. So there are manure releases, 389 reported in the last decade. And that includes spills that are accidental, or if there's a hose that's leaking, or a truck that has an accident carrying manure down the road. And the penalties for those really is not very much. Honestly, $500,000 since 2012. And, fish kills are also tracked, 47 events related to manure and fertilizer in that last decade. So, we see these big manure releases, but then we also know that as manure is spread across the landscape, it is also getting into the water in less sudden and high volume ways. So just through leaching through the soil, through tile lines, and then through runoff overland. So this is all contributing to water quality issues that we have in our state. We're a main contributor of nitrate and phosphorus to the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. And we're not seeing any signs of that slowing down. And then, of course, that creates consequences for us here in Iowa. So there's a lot of health issues related to nutrient pollution. That's strange. Blue baby syndrome is one that is most commonly associated with nitrate, but there's more and more evidence that there's cancer risk that's related to nitrate, as well as birth defects, excuse me. Excess nutrients can also cause harmful algae blooms, which can produce microcystin, which is a toxin that can be really dangerous if you come into contact with it on your skin or if you swallow it. And then, of course, there's bacteria associated with manure as well, and other pathogens that can cause illness. So there's also financial costs, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. And the issues with water quality don't just affect public water systems. They also affect private wells. So this analysis was done by the Environmental Working Group a couple of years ago, and they looked at private well monitoring data to see where the contamination, what the results were and where the contamination was. And so out of the 55,000 private wells that were tested during the, I think it was about 15-year time frame that they looked at, 40% tested positive for fecal bacteria, and 12% exceeded the drinking water standard for nitrate. Private wells are not regulated like public water systems, so it's up to the well owner to be testing and treating the well. And there's a lot of folks that are not really testing their wells very regularly at all. So this is definitely a concern for folks on private wells and in rural areas. You'll also notice that a lot of this private well contamination aligns with our karst. Oh, sorry, I don't know what I just did. There it is. With our, did I stop sharing my screen?
You did stop sharing your screen.
Oh, I don't know how that happened. Sorry.
Nope.
Try this again. Okay.
There we go.
Okay, so a lot of this aligns with karst terrain in Northeast Iowa. So karst terrain is very susceptible to pollution because there's a lot of connections between the surface water and groundwater. And so it's an area of particular interest and concern for drinking water quality and reliability. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the rulemaking process, what that is, and then some petitions that we filed related to rules related to CAFOs. So rules are essentially how agencies implement laws that are passed by the state legislature. So when a new law is adopted, the agency has to adopt rules to actually get to the specifics of how they're going to implement and enforce the law. And so rules have the force and effect of law. And those rules are adopted through a process called the Administrative Procedure Act. So that is a process by which there's a proposal by the agency, there's a public notice and comment period, there can be a hearing, and then when those rules are finalized and adopted, they are published in the state bulletin. And the Administrative Procedure Act in Iowa allows for anyone to file a petition for new rules. So IEC, along with the Environmental Law and Policy Center, have petitioned for rules in the past related to CAFOs. And so one of those that we filed was in August of 2021, and it was related to karst. So we wanted to see more protections for karst landscape from manure storage, increasing the distance between the manure storage and the karst landscape from 5 feet to 25 feet. And then we wanted to see some additional protections for source waters as well as outstanding Iowa waterways. And then in 2022, we also filed another petition asking the DNR to adopt a 100-year floodplain map, which I can talk about in a little bit. So this is just kind of a rundown of the actions that have taken place related to this. So this has been a years-long process that we have, filed petitions and been following the DNR's proposals to change rules. There was our first petition was denied, and as part of that, DNR said that they were working on a comprehensive rule review for the whole AFO chapter. So it wasn't just the things that we were asking for in the petition, but they were going to look at everything. And so they drafted those rules and released them in the fall, and we made comments on that. And then they sent that to the governor's office for pre-clearance in December. And then the governor came out with Executive Order 10 in January, which put a moratorium on all rulemaking. And also asked for a few different things related to reissuing the rules, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. But after that, there was a new draft that was released in May, and then we commented again on that in 2020, in June of this year. So this has been an ongoing process, and it will continue at least through the early part of next year for these rules specifically. So what are the rules and regulations? What we see is really a lack of regulation on these kinds of facilities in our state, and that's why there are so many of these facilities in our state. There is really lax rules related to siting. Facilities are often just pretty much automatically approved, and there's not a lot of protections for sensitive and vulnerable areas. There's also, issues related to the operations and enforcement of the rules. So the permitting and the manure management and application, the rules around these things are just not stringent. So just as an example of, some of the things that we asked for in our petitions and that we followed up on through the rulemaking process, related to karst, related to the 100-year floodplain, and related to nutrient application. You can see what the current rules are, and then what the DNR has proposed to change in this latest round of draft rules. So for karst terrain, they did put in some additional what are potential requirements for karst terrain. So having a 5-foot vertical separation plus a non-porous liner of some kind, whether that's rock or a clay liner or synthetic clay liner. They have proposed to adopt a 100-year floodplain map, which is really great. The confinement operations have been prohibited from building and expanding in the 100-year floodplain since 2002. The legislature passed a law saying that that was prohibited, but the DNR needed to adopt a floodplain map in order to be able to enforce that. And since 2002, they have not. And so with our petition, we asked them to do that to make it really clear where the floodplain was and where these facilities could be sited. And so they are proposing to adopt that 100-year floodplain map to make that really easy to determine. And then some of the nutrient application rules could potentially change. Instead of when you write an MMP, a manure management plan or a nutrient management plan, you can say that you're going to be applying manure to fields at the optimum yield rate. So that would be the average county yield plus 10%. So that's automatically saying that it's okay to apply manure above what is generally required for plant use. So the proposed rules have said that the MMPs must use the maximum return to nitrogen rate for corn and synthetic fertilizer instead of that over application rate. And that they need to be doing manure tests, nutrient tests more often. There are some things that they changed that we don't really like. So one is that they deleted some recommended practices. A lot of that has to do with, well, some of it has to do with the fact of the governor's executive order asking them to cut down on page counts and word counts and things like that. They removed a provision that would allow for a department of evaluation of special cases. Anaerobic digesters were included in this, but there are no additional requirements with those. And then there's an LLC loophole that has not been addressed through the rule changes. So we, along with a coalition of organizations, filed comments in the fall, and then again this spring on the proposed rule changes. And we've asked for more protections, especially in these sensitive areas and related to manure application. We support the DNR's move to require manure application rates at the maximum return to nitrogen rate. But we'd also like to see some other changes that would help with the understanding, transparency, and enforcement of CAFO operations and siting. So a big one would be requiring manure management plans to be electronic and online and geospatially referenced. So those are things that we have asked for in this latest round of comments and will continue to ask for. So I want to talk a little bit about Executive Order 10 and some economic impacts of poor water quality and why those two things are related. So in January, the governor issued this Executive Order 10, which created a moratorium on new rulemaking. And then it also required all agencies to analyze all rules. And in that analysis, the governor's office asked that the agencies would eliminate rules that do not provide substantiated benefits to Iowans. They asked for priorities related to reducing the page counts and word counts and reducing restrictive language. As part of the initiative to reduce page counts and word counts, they wanted agencies to be citing statute, so referencing statute instead of repeating statutory language in the rules. And then she also asked for the agencies to do a cost-benefit analysis of all of the rules. So this is going to be a 3-year process. So agencies have to review and repeal and then reissue all of the rules by the end of 2026. And so when this happened, we were unsure when the CAFO rules would we felt like we were really close to seeing those actually change in some way. And we didn't know if that would be really delayed for many years. But luckily, the DNR prioritized that rules package because they had already been working on it, and they were doing it this year. So that's why we've seen them reissue draft rules in May, and they're moving that process forward, which is great. So for part of this, there's the cost benefit analysis piece that is required. And, that is typically looking at it from the perspective of the person that's being regulated. So, how much does it cost to be complying with laws? And is that a burden? Well, we wanted to make sure, and we did this through our comments, that we were looking at some other costs that are associated with water pollution that, at the current rules, with the current rules that we have, what are the costs that we have? And if the rules were to be relaxed, how much more would it be for the public to be bearing the cost of that pollution? So we just included some different statistics in our comments, and we're going to be sharing infographics related to this as well in the future. But just some of the highlights, for health costs, there's been analyses that have shown that, there are direct medical expenses that are related to increased cancer incidences. And in Iowa, there are 313 cases of cancer per year that are related to nitrate. And then there are indirect costs that are associated with healthcare issues. So there's a loss of productivity and loss of life years. And nationally, these estimates related to nitrate pollution specifically are $1.6 to $8.2 billion. For Iowa's portion of those expenses, we see medical expenses every year from $6.25 to $37.5 million, and then indirect losses of $35 to $167.5 million. And if you want to see the references for any of these statistics, they're in our comment document, which is up on our website if you're interested in looking at those and the references. Then there are, of course, water treatment costs. There's, the centralized treatment for public water systems, and also point of use treatment for private wells. And there have been estimates made that, for public water supplies, it can be between $229 to $666 per person per year to treat the water for nitrate pollution. And then for private wells, $250 to $360 per person per year. And so if we math some of that out, we can see the total annual cost is estimated just for Des Moines and Cedar Rapids, which are the two largest public water systems, $165 million per year, and for private wells, $4 to $7.4 million. And then there are recreational impacts that are associated with this pollution. So currently in Iowa, lake tourism brings in $1 billion per year. And total tourism is at $6.1 billion per year and creates 65,000 jobs. And if we look at trout anglers, they actually spend a lot more. And in the driftless area, they spend $700 million per year. So if we're protecting those areas of ours up in the driftless area, some of that money is coming into Iowa, and they spend a lot on average per trip. So, and we also know that Iowans are willing to pay for cleaner water and for recreation opportunities. Iowans approved a constitutional amendment in 2010 that would increase taxes on ourselves up to $200 million per year for water quality and recreation. So we know that this is something that people value and are willing to spend money on. And so this slide is just kind of summarizing all of those expenses. And if we math that out for 10 years, we're looking at a cost of $2.1 to $3.5 billion for the water quality that we currently have. So I just like to always end with, action items that you can do. So you can be an advocate for water by getting involved in your community and getting to know your neighbors and elected officials, and letting us know how we can help. And if you sign up, you can get our action alerts, and you can take action to write to your legislators or other decision makers, elected officials, and write comments during the public comment periods. You can also write a letter to the editor or an op-ed to keep the conversation going in the public arena, and then of course supporting IEC. So that is all that I have. So I will stop there and let Matt take over.
All right. Thanks, Alicia. Okay. If you can go to the next slide, I'll do my job. One of my jobs as moderator, which is if you need a CCA CEU from today's webinar, please email Elena Whitaker. So it's ALENAW at iastate.edu by 5 o'clock today, and include your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Again, ALENAW at iastate.edu. And the next slide should be the voluntary demographic survey. If you watch this webinar live and you're willing to fill out a voluntary demographic survey, this is voluntary, but it's as part of folks that register and participate in USDA funded programs. If you've submitted a survey for a 2023 webinar, you're off the hook. But if you haven't and you're willing to do it, you can scan that QR code. I'm delaying so somebody can scan that if they want, or you can go to iowalearningfarms.org/survey. All right, next slide. Next week, we have looking at corn stover harvest impacts in central Iowa. So we have some colleagues from the USDA Agricultural Research Service, Rob Malone, Claire Phillips, and Peter O'Brien. Okay, you can get questions in, and we have some, and one of them was the same one as I had, which was, can you explain that LLC loophole?
Yeah, so so the LLC loophole has to do with siting of facilities and putting them in different names. So you can have two facilities that are side by side that are just under the permitting requirement level for a discharge pollution, a discharge permit. Mm-hmm. And if you name them different things, you can say that they're separate facilities instead of having them be combined as one, and then looking at the total amount that's being produced by both of those facilities, which are obviously being run together and often have shared infrastructure and are applying to the same fields, et cetera. So the loophole is that you can put them under different names of LLCs and claim that they're different owners, and then you don't have to be managing them as the same facility or doing anything to manage the pollution or get permits for that combined amount.
Okay. All right. I'm going to put in the chat box. There was, you talked about one of the other things. I wanted to go look at some of the health impact sources, but there was an attendee today that put another link from a recent study in Wisconsin as well. And so I'll put that in the chat box so everybody can see that. The next question though is, so the MRTN is based entirely on a spring fertilizer application. What guidance do you recommend for fall application? And work has shown that MRTN could be short in years with wet spring. What guidance or allowance might you recommend in this process for years where that recommended rate might be insufficient?
Yeah, so one of the things that we have called for separately is limits to fall fertilizer application, especially in places where there's water impairments. So not using that fertilizer in the fall and letting it run off into the streams before you're planting crops in the spring. So that's just a different kind of management, best management practice that we've called for. I think, there are researchers looking at MRTN and trying to come up with something that would be a little more site specific, so a little more usable for farmers than kind of a blanket MRTN. So I'm really interested to see what they're going to come up with related to that. But I think that could be, that could be helpful. But it could also be, again, leading to over application in some places. I'm not going to claim to know that I can provide recommendations on fertilizer application, but I know that like with the combination of manure and synthetic fertilizers, they're being over applied across the state. And so what can we do to try to reduce that and protect our water quality?
Okay, great. All right, the next one kind of related to one of your last comments there, but you estimated the medical expenses and indirect losses reference to nitrate and water quality. A lot of the talk was around CAFOs and manure. But our nitrate can come not only from manure, but synthetic fertilized fields. Should there, I guess, why is the focus much greater on manure than on, crops and the cropping system in the rulemaking?
Well, just because that is the chapter in which they're looking at the rules. And so, I think that there should be other rules related to fertilizer application. Okay. Sorry if you can hear that, there are sirens right outside. So I think that there should be other rules related to fertilizer application, not just to manure application, but when we're looking at rules related to CAFOs, the manure management piece is the crucial part of it. So where is the manure going? Is it being applied in a way that is going to be protective of water quality? And I think, one of the major gaps that we've seen is that on a lot of the manure management plans, at least every manure management plan I've seen, they're filled out to say that there is no synthetic fertilizer being applied to the field. And I don't know if that's actually if that's true or being verified by anybody, but I think, we need to be taking more of a hand in understanding what is being applied to the fields and in what quantities, and trying to regulate that and manage it in a better way.
So this may be more so for those references, but do you know how the cause of cancer was determined? Would there not be other causes of cancer besides nitrates, which I think those numbers you had were what were attributed to nitrate, but any idea on how some of those studies were determining the cause of cancer?
I can't remember, but they have a pretty thorough explanation of how they deduced that in the there was a environmental working group study where they were looking at that, and they referenced a paper in the environmental research journal that had done these estimates. So I can't recall off the top of my head how that was done.
Okay. Yeah, and hopefully that the link in the chat to the Wisconsin study also may have some useful information. You mentioned one of the coalition proposed changes would be to regulate anaerobic digesters. Could you please elaborate on this and what it might consist of?
For anaerobic digesters, I can't. So for that piece of the comment making or the comment document, we didn't write that section. It was one of our coalition partners that wrote it. So I can't recall exactly the specifics, but I think, it has to do with making sure that they need to be regulated. So, having some kind of organization that is or having some kind of enforcement and regulatory structure for those facilities as they're being developed. We're going to see more and more of those across the state.
So there was a question here that the nutrient reduction strategy, specifically the non-point source science assessment, highlights fall injected manure as a beneficial practice for nutrient reduction. I guess I can I better answer that one because that's in this non-point source science assessment on the end side. And so that was reviewing data that would have compared the fall manure at a late fall manure application timing when soils were 50 degrees and cooling compared to a spring commercial fertilizer. And it was a 4% difference or 4% less with the fall liquid swine manure just because of that study. It was really only one study, but I think two things that highlighted. One is that when we apply that commercial fertilizer and the manure at similar nitrogen rates, we see similar nitrate loss. But one of the things might be that with that manure, it may be applied earlier in the fall, which if we had early fall manure, we would not expect those similar results. Also, there may be cases where because we're applying nitrogen in the fall, we apply a bit more than we would in the spring. And that study specifically was looking at the same nitrogen rate, both in the fall and the spring. There was you had a chart showing the number of CAFOs in other states compared to Iowa. I guess what are the similarities and differences in kind of how things are maybe permitted in other states? Is that a cause why some of those other states might be lower?
Yeah, so the rules and regulations that we have here in Iowa have really created a safe haven for this kind of large industrial type agriculture. So that's why those facilities have proliferated across our landscape. Other states have a lot more requirements and are more serious in the way that they do permitting. So that kind of dissuades some operators from building there, and they'd rather come to a state like Iowa where it's a lot easier to get something approved and have less oversight.
Oh, another factor for livestock in Iowa is we have the food source right plentiful right
Yes.
nearby too compared to some of our other states. So with that, I think we got most of our questions answered. And in the interest of time, we will thank Alicia for giving this perspective. Certainly, I had heard about Executive Order 10, and I want to say that this was helpful for me to understand, how that impacts some of these things, or what some of I guess the process behind it, because I'd heard it but not heard what the process was. So it's not just for DNR for this. So that was really, really useful to understand. It's also great to hear that DNR has been doing some work to kind of move some of these on these manure rulemaking things forward. So it'd be great to see how that moves forward and the comments that are received. I guess, when would you expect kind of any additional pieces of information to come from DNR on this, kind of for all of us to kind of keep track of as well?
Yeah, so we're expecting to see that economic analysis come out in September.
Okay.
And there should be a comment period open for that. And then I think that the DNR wants to send the draft rules to the governor's office for pre-clearance in October or sometime this fall. And then we would expect to see a formal notice of rulemaking in December or January. And so having that another comment period open for 30 days on that, and then it would be voted on probably in early 2024.
And the general public is allowed to provide comments, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
So good. So one thing for folks on the webinar here today, if they have interest one way or the other, good opportunity to provide comments when any of those packages come out. There was a question here, if you're willing to share your slides.
Sure.
So maybe that this individual can get in touch with you directly. We'll take out the middle person here so something doesn't get lost in translation. So with that, again, if you need a CCA CEU, please email. I just realized I hadn't started my video back up. Everybody might have appreciated that I had it off. So If you need a CCA CEU, please email Elena W-A-L or Lena Whitaker, but A-L-E-N-A-W at iestate.edu by 5 o'clock today with your name, the name you entered to watch the webinar, and your CCA number. Next week, webinar corn stover harvest impacts in central Iowa by researchers at the USDA Ag Research Service, Rob Malone, Claire Phillips, and Peter O'Brien. So with that, thank you very much, Alicia, and thanks everybody for attending today.
Thank you.